The Abyss, Part 3. In a meadow where it was lighter, 3 men were seated in silence by an empty bottle, and they looked attentively at this approaching couple. One of them, who was clean-shaven like an actor, whistled, burst out laughing, and chuckled. The heart of the youth sank within him, but, as if being pushed from behind, he went straight up to the men by a path that led by them. Those wretches were waiting their opportunity. Their eyes grew dark, motionless, and terrible. Wishing to engage the sympathy of these gloomy, ragged fellows, on whose faces he could read a cruel menace, and in order to show how defenceless they were, maybe to awaken pity, Nemovetsky inquired in an anxious voice, "Where shall we find the turnpike? Is this the right way to it?" he asked. The fellows did not answer. The one who was clean-shaven whistled low and derisively, while the others remained silent, looking at the young couple with heavy and ill-boding searching glances. All 3 were drunk, wickedly inclined, and desirous of passionate pleasures and excitement. One, red-faced and fat, lifted himself on his elbows, and after balancing himself upon the ground like a bear on his paws, got up, sighing heavily. His companions stared at him, and again turned their gaze upon Zinaida. "Ah, fear seizes me," she cried. "Fear seizes me," she repeated. Without hearing these words, Nemovetsky understood her meaning by the heavy pressure of her hand, and, trying to preserve an expression of calmness, while feeling the inevitability of the fatal moment, he moved on with a sure, firm pace. These scoundrels, with their murderous, glittering eyes, remained behind. "We must run away." This thought passed through his mind, but at once he said to himself, "No, it is not wise to flee. This young felon is only carrion. His condition awakes my pity," said one of the 3, a bald man with a red beard. "The girl, however, is a fine specimen. But everyone could have such a woman." And somewhat hoarsely they all began to laugh. "Sir, wait a little. I wish to say something to you," roared one of the 3 with a bass voice, when at a glance from him his companions rolled to their feet. Nemovetsky, without looking behind, walked even further on. "You ought to stop if they ask you," said the red-bearded man. "Otherwise you might get a good drubbing." "They are calling you," shouted the big fellow, and in 2 strides he overtook the young couple. His massive hand fell on Nemovetsky's neck and seized hold of him. As Nemovetsky turned to look back, he saw right in front of his face large, round, wicked eyes. They were so near him as if he looked at them through a magnifying glass, and could clearly distinguish the thin red veins on the white of the eyes and the very hairs of his eyelashes. Having unconsciously dropped the hands of the girl, Nemovetsky slipped his hand into his pocket and murmured in a low voice, "You want my money? Take it with pleasure." The prominent eyes became more and more piercing. When Nemovetsky eluded their gaze, the big fellow lagged behind, and from beneath struck him a blow on the chin with his fists. The student became dizzy, his fifth chattered, his cap slipped over his forehead, and he fell back unconscious. Zinaida looked behind and then took flight with all the speed she could use. Then the clean-shaved man cried with a drawling voice, "Ah!" and with this he ran after her. Nemovetsky staggered to his feet, but even before he could straighten himself, he was struck down again. The struggle was unequal. They were 2, and he only 1, and as well as being weak, he was not used to fighting. Yet he struggled, fidgeted and scratched like an angry woman, wept and bit their hands. At length he became completely exhausted, and his foes carried him away. He at first resisted them, and in fear began to roar, but afterwards ceased to comprehend what was happening, and hung senseless upon the hands which were lifting him. The last objects he saw were a piece of a red beard, which almost came into his mouth, and then the darkness of the forest, and finally the skirts of a running girl. She ran silently and as swiftly as if acting in the play of the cat and the mouse, and in order to overtake her, the clean-shaven man continued to run. Nemovetsky now experienced nothing but a blank. He fell heavily on the ground, his presence of mind lost. The big red-bearded fellow, having thrown Nemovetsky into the ditch, waited with his companion for a while, listening to what was going on down below. As their faces were turned towards this spot, they lost sight of Zinaida. All at once rose a loud, deafening shout of a woman. Then, just as suddenly, it was hushed, and the big fellow cried out furiously, "You wretch! You touch her only, and you are a dead man!" Thanks to the tall, rough, but more kindly inclined companion, the poor girl had escaped from any misfortune.